Good morning, everyone. I'm Professor Bert Chapman from Purdue University's Library and School of Information Studies, where my subject specialties are government information history and political science. And today I'd like to talk about some of the literature on Space Force policy that's being produced during the opening 8 months of the Biden administration. And besides Biden administration policy documents, this is also including congressional materials and materials from other agencies within the U.S. government. As we know, with the controversy over last year's election and the fact that the Space Force was created during the Trump administration, there have been some debate as to whether the Space Force would continue during the Biden administration. There was some advocacy from some of Biden's more leftist base to abolish the Space Force, and this was reflected in a November 2020 letter to the Pentagon transition team from these various organizations, including the Union of Concerned Scientists, complaining they felt the Space Force would create an unnecessary and costly bureaucracy, and it would focus U.S. Efforts on militarization instead of space cooperation, and increase the risk to U.S. and military civilian space assets. Just before the Biden administration began, the Defense Department's Director of Operational Test and Evaluation produced its annual report, which covers weapons systems from all branches of the armed services, including joint collaborative efforts. In some of the sections on space-related military applications, they mentioned that the GPS, or the Global Positioning Satellite Enterprise, continues having problems and delays in its user terminal and satellite control segments. And they mentioned that, for instance, space vehicles lack requirements to add cybersecurity survivability of threats. And it also included some recommendations for the GPS program, including recommending that Space Force include cyber survivability requirements in all future acquisitions through programs. And then an important part of determining an administration's policy, whether it's on Space Force or any other areas, can be ascertained during Senate confirmation hearings on presidential nominations. And this was particularly true for the Space Force. And so before Congressional committee hearings began, many Senate committees provide additional policy questions to various nominees. So there were some to the Secretary of Defense nominee and eventual Secretary of Defense Lloyd Wilson, and SASC refers to Senate Armed Services Committee, and they asked Wilson if he thought creation of the Space Force and Space Command was warranted, and Space Command and Space Command. And if so, do you recommend changes in the structures, authorities, and missions of these organizations? And Austin recommended that decisions creating Space Force and Space Command reflect recommendations and advice of multiple independent commissions and studies on how to adapt defense space assets to growing security challenges in space. And then he goes on, he'll assess the structure and authorities of these missions, as well as their relationship with other DoD stakeholders. And then and these advanced policy questions are freely available on the Senate Armed Services Committee website, and they're can be very lengthy and detailed. So he mentions the committee asking him if the current national defense strategy, which was published by the Trump administration in 2018, accurately assessed the strategic environment as it pertained to space. And Austin thought that that document properly highlighted great power competition with China and Russia, and the need to develop space and counter-space strategies to counter Chinese and Russian threats in that area. Then on February 2nd, 1921, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, using omnipresent Twitter, said they look forward to continuing Space Force's development and evolution. Then on March 3rd of this year, the Biden administration released its interim national security strategic guidance. And they had very limited explicit mention to Space Force. They did mention that the administration would strive to use outer space to benefit humanity and secure the safety, stability, and security of outer space activities. This particular document is kind of a preliminary to what will eventually be a congressionally mandated national security strategy of the United States. Those usually tend to come out every 4 years at the beginning of presidential administrations. I'm not sure what the timetable is for the Biden administration's version of this document. And then as spring went on, there were a number of different congressional committee hearings held by the House Armed and Services Committees, as well as the Senate Appropriations Committee's defense subcommittees. And an April 20th Senate Armed Services Committee hearing, Air Force Space Command Commander General James Dickinson emphasized that space is a warfighting domain, stressed how China and Russia have expanded their space warfighting capabilities with particular areas of emphasis, including direct energy, electronic warfare, and jamming and laser technology. The same hearing, Iowa Senator Joni Ernst, who's a member of the committee, asked Dickinson how the U.S. proposed to overcome space congestion caused by nearly 50 spacefaring nations and private ventures. And he mentioned this problem, and he acknowledged that there are over 1,300 satellites in space. He recognized the economic benefits of these satellites while recognizing that the volume of these satellites presents increased unpredictability. Finally, on May 28th, the Biden administration released its proposed U.S. government budget for fiscal year 2022, which is supposed to start October 1st. Usually the presidential budget proposal comes out in February of the year, but this year took to late May. And so they recommended increasing Space Force personnel from 6,434 to 8,400. They proposed a budget of increase from Space Force operation and maintenance from 2.569 to 3.440 billion. A procurement budget increase from 1.330 billion to 1.182 billion, and research, development, testing, and employment increases from 5.366 billion to 9.576 billion. One thing that we need to remember when presidential administrations release their budget requests is these are Christmas wish lists. They have to go through a lengthy congressional budget process, and sometimes more money can be added to the request by congressional appropriators, or money can be taken away. Then in May of this year, the U.S. Space Force issued a vision for a digital service. And I'll mention all these documents that I'm showing you are freely available to the public. So they mentioned this is since Space Force was the first military service established during the information age, they stressed the importance of it being born digital. And they're talking about how working in a digitized environment is particularly important for the Space Force, and how it has to be very adaptable, and it emphasizes using the John Boyd mantra of observe, orient, decide, and act, or the OODA loop. And so they mentioned there's some 3 tenets for the Space Force: be interconnected, innovative, and digitally dominated. And so this slide provides additional details on what Space Force means by these attributes. They also present a scenario which I've edited on how Space Force may respond to future threat scenarios. And so at the time T-0, an emergent threat's identified, and they include fused intelligence from an AI engine identifying a new threat, and various stakeholders from different sections of the government are becoming involved. Then at T+2 hours, there's a virtual threat conference facilitating real-time interaction within the data space. And then at T+12 hours, Guardians, which is the term now used to describe Space Force personnel, they take action in various ways by enabling real-time data exchange and visualization. And at T+36 hours, short-term countermeasures and long-term responses are explored and executed. And then they mention it's important for every Guardian to be bold in identifying opportunities for innovating and evolving a vision of digital service. And there's emphasis on collaboration and empowerment. And they reference a forthcoming roadmap, which I don't believe has yet been published. As part of the Congressional Oversight process, the Government Accountability Office, or GAO, conducts reviews of government programs for the Congressional Oversight Committees, and they also get involved in the contracting process. And so on May 21st, they partially accepted and rejected a protest from Inmarsat against DoD release of private pricing data. They protested that the Defense Information Systems Agency, or data, failed to satisfactorily mitigate competitive harm Inmarsat said they received from inadvertently releasing non-price width on non-bandwidth pricing. GEO upheld that portion of the process and said Inmarsat must be reduced, must be reimbursed for cost of filing a protest. But however, the GEO rejected Inmarsat's contention that its past contractual performance could be used as a factor in upholding its protest. Then on May 24th of that year, GEO personnel testifying before the House Armed Services Committee issued a statement on space acquisition programs and opportunities. They mentioned that over the past decade, DoD's faced various challenges in acquiring its space systems that have resulted in scheduled delays of 5 or more years, hundreds of millions of dollars, or even billions of dollars in cost increases and program cancellations due to development programs. And they mentioned that space systems are subject to an increasing variety of threats, such as electromagnetic radiation and collision with debris in space. And then they mentioned that it's important that space management programs follow DoD recommended knowledge-based leading practices in various areas. Professional military educational institutions have also become increasingly involved in developing involving Space Force. One of these is at the Schriever Space Scholars Program at Alabama's Air University, which is the Air Force's professional military educational institution. And this scholars program wants to develop warfighting curriculum to enable the advancement of space warfare and doctrine. So they mentioned some of the different entities that are involved in this. And so there's now a 1 year academic year curriculum flow that covers topics such as leadership, war theory, international security, spacefarer, and joint warfighting, with the goal of producing a research product at the end of this program. Space Force has also been engaged in various memorandums of understanding with multiple universities, and they want to promote collaboration to produce world-class research, advanced academic degrees, and workshop and leadership development for USSF Guardians, as well as various other categories. So some of the institutions involved include my institution of Purdue University, Georgia Tech, and this is the text from a agreement with the University of Colorado system. There's been some debate on the Space Force on the floor of the House. On June 16th of this past year, California Representative Mike Garcia, in support of Space Force, mentioned that U.S. currently holds an advantage in space, but that advantage can vanish very quickly if it's not preserved. And he obviously references threats posed from foes such as varied as China, Russia, and Iran. Something that's been going along during this time period has been the protracted congressional budget process. So on July 15th of this year, the House Appropriations Committee approved FY 2022 defense spending legislation. This is the opening page of this report. And these reports can top the scales at several hundred pages. So they mention for the Space Force's operation and maintenance request, they recommend that it be cut from the administration's $3.440 billion to $3.372 billion, and then the procurement budget be cut from $2.766 billion to $2.741 billion. And you'll notice on the right side of the screen, even though the resolution may not be the best, they give you a detailed line item summary of how much money was requested for different systems, such as counter space systems, and how much money the committee recommends. And they recommended a cut in the research, development, test, and evaluation from $11.266 billion to $10.774 billion. And then, besides providing just numbers, committee reports on budget request will contain detailed analytical comments on what they think are areas of strength and areas of concern. So they're talking about here they're concerned that the Air Force has not been more aggressive in addressing longstanding space acquisition problems, and that they've not defined what the Space Force will do that is fundamentally different from when it was a component of the Air Force. And so they mentioned they believe the Space Force needs a clear and concrete vision for its future system architectures, which are based on rigorous technical analysis with executable plans with a realistic, resource budget. And they also mentioned they're concerned by growing threats posed by ground-based lasers capable of damaging or destroying sensitive space sensors in low technology orbit. And then there's some very specific provisions within the House Appropriations Committee report, such as one section prohibiting funds from being used to transfer the National Reconnaissance Office to the Space Force. And then you can also find earmarks for specific projects within legislation. An example of this was a earmark for $1.665 million for a core manipulator joint unit at Texas A&M University's engineering experiment station. And this earmark was inserted by Representative Pete Sessions of Texas, whose district includes that university. I'm not sure whether it is that particular earmark has made it into the final version of this legislation. And on July 22nd, the Senate completed its markup of the Defense Authorization Act. They kept Space Force personnel at 8,400. They mentioned that their subcommittee on strategic forces gets oversight of DoD space programs, and there are various other provisions are available here. Now, they have not completed, the Senate Armed Services Committee has not completed final language of its report. And there are various other things here, including congressional committees will require agencies or supervisors to provide briefings or reports on various issues to facilitate the committee's work and public understanding of these reports. Then on September 10th of this year, just a couple of weeks ago, the House Armed Services released its defense spending report, House Report 117-118. This was done after a 16-hour-long markup session, which is televised as a webcast on the Senate Armed Services, on the House Armed Services Committee website. They included some materials on the need for the Air Force to establish a Chief Science, Technology, and Innovation Officer and a university partnership program to improve science and technology strategic vision, as well as leveraging research capabilities. And then they directed the Chief of Space Operations to provide a briefing by January 31st, 2022 to the House Armed Services Committee to assess the effectiveness of the Space Force's higher education strategy in these various areas listed afterwards. They also wanted the DoD and the Space Force to rapidly embrace cloud computing technology to ensure U.S. space leadership in this vital domain. And they also, in section 1604 of these report, required Congress to prepare a report to congressional defense committees on specific legal authorities that would be need change to address long-term challenges to U.S. Space Force launch-range physical infrastructures and various other categories. Some future developments that will occur is over the next probably few weeks, House and Senate versions of the Space Force's role and budget will need to be reconciled or attempt to be reconciled by the end of this month, when the new federal fiscal year is supposed to start on October 1st. However, recent precedent says that continuing resolution will be required for the start of FY22 on October 1st, 2021. Then over the next subsequent months and years, Biden administration Space Force policy documentation will occur through DoD issuances, which are basically DoD memorandums that are freely available, The upcoming U.S. national strategy and national defense strategy documents, congressional oversight funding and reporting requirements, Federal Register documentation, which will include regulations, meetings, and it'll be seeking comments on regulations, documentation produced by Space Force, the National Space Council, which is being continued from the Trump administration during the Biden administration, and federal contracting activity. So there'll be a lot of resources available to keep track of how Biden administration space policy developments proceed. And I will be ready to take any questions.
There's nothing in the question box at the moment, but I was wondering, there was quite a hefty part of the budget you showed that was 10 billion or so just for research, which seems like a large portion of the ideal budget. And so do you see that opening up to sort of a competitive grant process to any university?
Yes, I think there'll be very acute interest in that.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I know in physics often we have DOE contracts, competitive grants with NSF, of course, and Department of Defense in general. So it's something that I think that most universities would jump on if they were offered the chance. Very good, very good. And there were 3 or 4 MOUs with universities you mentioned. Now, do they kind of have an idea to expand that to programs that any university could develop? Or
I think they'll want universities with strong backgrounds in aerospace science and technology.
Would make sense. Yeah. Now this seems way down the line. So let's say, as far as I understand, it's 2 or 3 years before Space Force starts really developing and has a solid structure. Is that a guess?
That's probably a guess. I mean, they've been in existence now for going on 2 years, and it often takes a while for agencies to stand up programs. Their Space Force now is in the process of obtaining some additional authorities that have been previously held by Army or Air Force space programs, but there's no guarantee that those transformations will run smoothly.
Of course, yeah. I'm just trying to think when the last new branch, so to speak, of DoD came about.
Yeah,
I mean, been some time ago.
The Air Force started like in the 1947, 1949 range when DoD was created. So after 7 decades without having any new branches to the Defense Department, there will be some time lag necessarily occurring.
Yeah, I can only imagine. This is sort of a random question because I know in astrophysics we talk about this all the time, about there being so much debris in space. Do you see the Space Forces, being sort of starting out with cleaning up some of the?
I think that will definitely be an area they'll have to be involved with, and like there may be some kind of cooperation with different commercial or space entities or NASA.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of the regulatory regime, the government rules for that will still need to be determined. It's just been within the past few years that a new section of the U.S. Code dealing with commercial space legal activity has been enacted.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, sorry. Now there's a few in the Q&A box, so let me read them to you here. Corey Best says, what role do you think the expanded use of private space companies will have on the growth of the Space Force? Is the government more likely to contract them out to them instead of building the Space Force?
I think there'll be public-private partnerships between the Space Force and the commercial space industry. To what extent that'll occur remains to be seen. I think Congress is going to be particularly interested in ensuring that there's cost sharing between the private sector and the Space Force.
Yeah, that seems like a very logical approach, right? They sort of have the model with NASA and all of their JPL and other subcontractors.
Right.
So yeah, interesting. Very good. One more question here from Charles Dorn. Pardon me if I tortured the pronunciation, but he's asking 1958 big database between NASA and DARPA on who would do what. So I don't know if that makes sense to you, Bert.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's some collaboration between NASA, DARPA, and maybe other federal entities or approved private sector or academic sources.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And oops, somebody raised their hand. Let me check that. Charles, if you're there, was that the question you had? I hope. I don't see anything in the chat box. So hopefully that gives you a good solid answer to your question, Charles. Any other questions anyone would like to put in the Q&A box or the chat? I'm going to pause for just a second here in case someone's still typing. Overall, I'm quite excited, Bert, to see where this progresses. I think it's certainly in my lifetime, I've never been around for a development of a new branch of the military. So I think this is very cool. And of course, being in astrophysics.
And there'll be one thing I want to say is there'll be a lot of publicly accessible information resources on this in terms, if you want to, you're interested from a business standpoint, if you want to comment on the federal regulatory process, or if you want to comment to your congressional representatives on pros or cons of the Space Force.
Excellent point. Yeah, make your voice heard. If anyone in the group has opinions on the Space Force, please inform your congressperson. So, all right.
Can I actually make to that point, right? How are people going to interact with them on social media? Is it going to be Twitter? Like how, and what's the best way to track it? Like I noticed the tweet of, the tweet, but there was no hashtag to actually sort of understand how people are interacting within the questions that they could have. But social media and natural language processing could so much benefit that interaction between the people and
any social media platform. I think is fair game. Now, like if you're commenting on regulations, there's a website called regulations.gov in which you can contact federal agencies under the Administrative Procedures Act to see if you think a proposed regulation is good or bad. Probably if you're writing your congressional representative, I'd use email, because in many cases you might have to go into more substantive detail than you could through a tweet or some other social media platform.
Very good, very good. One more pause for any questions from the attendees. Okay. Well, if you don't mind, Bert, I would ask you to stop sharing. Okay. And then let's see here. Emily, of course, when you're ready to start sharing, please do. Okay, so just a quick introduction. Emily Fogarty is a geography faculty member at American Public University, and she's going to be doing a review of the survey, or the, pardon me, having trouble talking, a review of the literature in STEM as it relates to private and government space policy. So without further ado, Emily, please. Emily, are you talking? Because it looks like you're muted. If you're not ready yet, please forgive me. We can't hear you. I'm sorry to say. It looks as if.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. There we go. We got you. We got you. We got you. All right.
Thank you. All
Pardon
my
me.
all my controls disappeared because I have two
Oh,
screens and I'm
of
sharing
course.
one. Yes, and of course all my cheat sheet notes are on this screen, and I'm looking at all of you. Hello, how's
Understood.
it going? All right, so I can't keep track of my time quite yet, so and I can't see the chat. So if you have any questions, you have to verbally kind of interrupt me, please. I'm Dr. Fogarty. Emily, how's it going? And I thought I only had 15 minutes, but I have a half hour, so I'm pretty excited. I'm still going to try to get through the majority of what I wanted to show you so that possibly I could do some live demo stuff if you'd like, which I had not factored in. So I was excited to kind of be a part of this conference, and I'm looking forward to kind of looking at other talks. As I mentioned, I'm a geographer, right? I'm very interested in kind of a network analysis of words and semantic of things, and oftentimes it's Twitter conversations that I'm thinking about. But in this case, I wanted to see maybe where the scholarship and the literature that is being consumed by and written about by all the folks that are maybe attending this conference today, what does that look like? Who are the major players, and how can I do that in a quantitative way? So I'm here to sort of present you with a tool and some ideas and then some visualizations of that related to the specific query of sort of exploring that intersection between military civilian space and then science, technology, education, and policy. So hopefully it teased out some things. I'm not 100% sure what to make of what I see because I'm not a writer in the field, but maybe some of the things that I noticed you'd be interested in seeing, but more importantly, the tools that I'm about to show you so that you could be armed with doing your own literature review and really quantitative analysis of the scholarship that's happening. And you can take it to many different levels, and I'm going to show you. Right, so a lot of you already looked at my the abstract, so I'm not going to go into it, and I basically just discussed with you what it is that I'm kind of looking at in terms of peer review things, and I'm going to go into it in more detail on upcoming slides. So yeah, so I'm going to spend time doing that, right? So let's talk a little bit about Billboard Metrics, right? I've mentioned it a couple of times. It is R-based, and which is a whole other kind of statistical processing, which I'm sure that the majority of you are familiar with. You don't have to be a coder to implement the BiblioShiny aspect, which is a lot of all of the visualizations that you'll see in this talk came from the BiblioShiny. It's basically clicking user interface. It is in terms of a tool of science, right? It provides quantitative analysis. It works with 4 different bibliographic databases. In my case, I queried the Web of Science, and I'm going to kind of quickly show you what I did there, and then kind of move into how I analyzed it. Right? So this slide is showing scientific mapping, basically. And really what's important about all of this is not so much all of the Coolio statistical analyses that you can apply from data collection through visualization, but the fact of how I did the data collection, the portions of the data analysis that can be implemented by the bibliometrics and the BiblioShiny, and then what those data visualizations look like, right? There is a massive amount of help and information and guidance in the R community related to this package that give you all the formulas and everything that you need to know behind the scenes. But I think the front end user portion is what's valuable, because those are the things that you want to put into your papers or do in your research, or maybe give a talk about or whatnot. So really that's what I'm going to sort of focus on today in terms of that, not so much all the mathematical things behind it. So quickly, I did a query in the Web of Science, and I specifically looked for terminologies that were in English, and I basically was trying to narrow down results because of the way that my query was so large. It really brought back a lot of things, right? Things that maybe weren't necessarily pertaining to the core focus of what I was trying to get at in terms of analyzing, right? So, you know, from 1 million something down to 8,000, I finally got roughly 2,200. I'm able to bring 2,000 records in at a time for the BiblioShiny. So those were highly cited papers that fit my query of, you know, military and space, civilian and space, and then those plus or space education, technology, policies, etc. So I was able to bring that and then download it as a text document and then interface it into the BiblioShiny interface, right? If I have time later, I'll be glad to show you, right? You simply upload a zip file because of the way that you have to download it from the Web of Science into the BiblioShiny interface. You have your R on and everything works together to kind of look at different levels of analysis. So for instance, you can look at sources or authors or documents within, you know, my collection of 2,000 things. And you could look at also the structure of these things, right? Conceptual, intellectual, or social. So let's take a look at what that means in terms of the statistical techniques and the metrics that do those things, right? So if I'm looking at my sources, and I'll go into more of like what is a source, right? Authors and documents are, I can use these different metrics like Bradford's law, H indexes, right? I can look at most relevant authors. Now I'm going to give you a little blurb about each one of these, but I'm not going to show you all of them because I wouldn't have time. We'd be here for like an hour talking about all these different things, which would be awesome with me, but everybody else might start to fall asleep. So if you want, but if you're interested in these things, especially when you first start looking at your data, you can delve into lots of stuff, micro or macro, right? On the structure side, right, we can look at statistical techniques like network analysis and factor analysis and thematic mapping, histograms and things to look at, again, the conceptual, intellectual, and social, which I'll get into more detail about in a few slides, right? So really never really thought that our papers or the publications that we're consuming are like this scientific document, this unit of a complex relational system, right? But how? Because it gives us information about what's the title, right? Who are in the references? What are the references? What is the abstract saying? What are the keywords, right? How are the authors collaborating? What institutions do they come from, right? So all this is valuable information when you're trying to determine, okay, do I need to write about this? Who's already written about it? I'm doing research. I want to agree, disagree, right? Where do I find out relevant stuff in a quick and quantitative way? Right, well, you can look at this and go through a whole bunch of them and print them all out and write on them like I do. Or you could put them into bibliometrics and kind of tease out information within the different descriptions, right? So it's the Web of Science spits out these different field tags, which if you use, there is R code that backs all of this nice user interface stuff up. So if you, you know, if you mess around with the CR column and rename it, your code's going to be a little messed up. But if you leave it, there are tags, there's a little descriptor, and then your data actually looks like this when you bring it into the BiblioShiny, right? Where you, it's per document, and then the information about the authors, for instance, the abstract, the keywords, and this is how the bibliometrics is going to do all its fancy stuff to consume this information to give you basic information like, you know, how many documents? Okay, 2,000. I knew that because that's what we pulled in. Well, of those 2,000 documents, 74 of them are sources, right? Which a journal, book, conference proceeding, etc. And if you could see down on the bottom, it actually breaks out the different document types that we're dealing with to add up to that 2000, and then how many keywords, etc. So there's a number of these things within the main data information about the collection that you can kind of look at in sort of like an exploratory analysis kind of way, right? Number of authors. Also, it breaks out a little bit about the collaboration measures, right? So documents per authors within the collection, co-authors, collaboration indexes, etc. And then of course, all of this is going to be able to be, you know, in a table or some kind of visualization later on within the process, right? So another pretty cool, I think, exploratory option is this Sankey diagram, right? It allows like the study flow from entities are represented by rectangles or their text, right? In this case, sort of both, and arrows or arcs are used to show the flow between them. Now, unfortunately, this is static, so, but in the BiblioShiny, I can actually hover over these and see which links go to where, right? But if you're consuming this visually, you're saying, okay, well, authors all the way to the left, sources all the way to the right, these are the primary authors that are publishing in this field based on the query of the words that I gave you, right? Military space, civilian space, policy, education, etc. And then the keywords that are being used, and then the sources in which they're being published, right? So that's a quick way and dirty way of seeing, okay, what are the major players? What are they talking about? And where are they publishing? You can look at intellectual roots of information via the references, right? So I sort of changed it up a little bit with my collection all the way over to research contents on the right in terms of keywords. So, okay, what are the references? And then who are the authors? And then what are the main keywords, right? So those are sort of preliminary exploratory things. So now we can also look at the sources, the authors, right? And see what really we can tease out in that. So again, a source is a journal, article, book, proceeding, etc. And in my 2000 documents, there are 74 sources. And then I've listed the top 20 here in terms of where the information and the scholarship that I consumed in my 2000 documents is coming from, right? We can also look at the cited source of a journal, right? So the actual journal itself. And why is this important? Well, okay, it's sort of leading into this idea of how do I find the core courses that, core courses, listen to me, core articles or journals or scholarship that are in my collection, and then maybe hone in on them to see what's being written about what, and then who did they cite, et cetera, right? So this can be done through the BiblioShiny interface in that using the Bradford law of scattering, right? And it's often used as guidance to determine the number of core journals within a given subject. So most of the articles on a given subject have a tendency to be bunched together in a small number of journals. So in this case, I've got 3 journals in 771 articles that are considered to be the core, right? So nature, science, and not surprisingly, like astrophysical journals are primarily where the scholarship is coming from for the concepts and terminologies that I queried, which, you know, they're kind of hogging the business there, right? So how can we possibly, you know, move this out or make it more diverse in terms of, you know, and what and why? It could be just the way that I queried it, right? Etc. But also useful information that the Bibliometrics gives about your stuff are the source growth. And when I saw this, I thought, oh man, this is really interesting, because I bet everybody's source growth and all scholarship totally plummeted from 2020 to 2021. This is like a whole another cool paper to write, and just doing comparison of scholarship plummeting in terms of source growth, right? Because it looked like we were sort of kind of getting up there in terms of maybe scholarship that was being, you know, put in, at least for my query. And All right, so also we can look at authors, and I'm sorry if I'm flying through this, but I just want to make sure we get through the majority of it in terms of data analysis and stuff, because the visualizations are pretty cool too. Yes, the ability to make these graphics in terms of most relevant authors is cool, and they also have tables that are behind it. So again, the BiblioShiny is you push the button and it tells you, okay, these are the most relevant authors. And then even more interesting, it can give you the author production over time, right? So if you're interested in how often they're being cited or how often they're putting out documents and when, you can do that. And this is also interactive in the BiblioShiny, so you can actually see which ones, and then you can link back to figure out from the table what articles are associated with the data of this visualization. Right? We can look at the most relevant affiliations, right? So University of California and Berkeley, they're going to be out there looking for some money, right, to fill the research gap, right? But because obviously they have a prolific amount of people that are kind of publishing the information related to these types of things out there. So I kind of did the graph and the chart at the same time, because again, it gives you both, and you can export them as PNGs and whatnot. So it's really nice to be able to insert into your scholarship or whatever you're writing about. We can gain information about the most cited countries. We can also see how countries are collaborating in terms of multiple publications across countries or just single publications, right? And then I also superimposed the ratios and the graphics and the frequencies and the counts that are sort of behind this visualization. And additionally, we can look at the country-specific production, right? The frequency in which certain countries are being cited for their particular scholarship for my search, right? All right, so authors, and we can also look at documents and their contents in terms of their bibliographies, right? So now, documents, again, are citing documents. Like, it refers to the scientific document, like the article, the conference proceeding, etc. I included all of them. I could have filtered out to only certain ones within my 2000, but I kept everything within it to sort of do a general overview of, what I pulled for that particular query, to specifically sort of give you an example of how you can, leverage this for yourselves. And there's lots of again, guidance out there in terms of how you could run through this, right? So I really looked at the documents and the references, and there's different levels of what you can look at in terms of what you include in the searches when you're looking at more metrics. So for instance, all 2000 are included when I'm looking at most global cited documents, right? So the top of the list really doesn't change much. I could have queried out some of these to like see maybe a big, or added more in, whatnot. But again, I kind of just kept it at this level of focus. More sort of telling and useful for someone looking at, okay, what scholarship is actually, being used the most within my kind of core collection of things. Then, okay, here's my local cited documents. And then I've sort of pulled out what those documents are, and that I was able to get at from the table data behind this graphic. So it specifically sort of helps you out in terms of, okay, where are they and what are they doing? And then you can, go look them up and read them, or whatever you're going to do in terms of figuring out why, for your literature review. Although somebody actually used bibliometrics to do a literature review of coronavirus literature, which, dang it, they beat me to it. So I'm doing one on Twitter and how COVID, seems on Twitter. But like, this is still like, again, like as I was building this, I was like, man, that must have been really interesting to see like who's doing what. But I felt like this would be interesting for this audience because it may be, I've cited that person, or I'm familiar with that person's work, etc. Right, so most relevant words in terms of frequency of words within the collection. And you can notice on the left that we can do like keyword plus frequencies. And those are in the Web of Science that are generated by a computer algorithm, and they sort of consume the words that are in that appear in the titles of the references, not so much the actual title of the paper, because there's another one that does titles of papers specifically, right? So I felt like, yeah, great, we can like do a graph, but the word cloud of it, I feel like is more telling, right? In the keywords plus over a 10-year period, like the big ones are like the main themes of what was going on within the references of you know, my 2000 documents in my core collection, right? So frequencies in terms of author keywords are going to look a little bit different than the word terms from the references, right? Which it's supposed to. So again, a word cloud of those things, like I'm not surprised surveys in there, right? But it's kind of, I thought it was interesting to kind of see all the different key words in terms of the author keywords and how they felt it was important to kind of get what their scholarship was about out there. And then we can also do titles, right? Again, not surprising, like survey and data, galaxy, things like that are all pretty prevalent in terms of titles of the scholarship that I found in my collection, right? So more fun is kind of just throwing them all up there so you can kind of make the comparisons if you wanted to. This could be its own paper in terms of taking that and then pulling the semantics of all the articles or the sentiment of the cowords or whatever. It could go up on a rabbit hole down with the word clouds. Right, so that kind of brings together in terms of what the bibliometrics does in terms of sources, authors, and documents, and the visualizations and such that you can do, right? I didn't cover things like H-index and some of the other things, but they are available. Also now is what I'm going to try to make sort of an abbreviated run with is regarding the structure, and the K structures are conceptual, intellectual, and social, and then their statistical techniques are kind of listed next to them, right? So what does that really mean? Well, if I'm looking at the main theme and trend of what science is talking about, then I can look at the conceptual structure, and those can be measured with these types of things in terms of network approaches, co-occurrence networks, thematic map, thematic evolution, which that one is super cool because it actually brings keywords or knowledge or whatever theme that you want to use and sees how it changes through time. Has it gone from an emerging theme to one that's used now, or did it die off? So there's lots of really cool stuff that can be looked at there. How the author is influencing a given scientific structure is that intellectual structure. So you can then sort of look at the historiography, the co-citation networks. You can also gauge the collaboration of folks in a social structure and how institutions and countries or authors are interacting with one another via this portion of the science mapping. So lots of words that I'm not going to read because they're in the slide, and now you can pause on them if you want to like get a little bit more information about the statistical analyses that are flowing behind the visualizations that I'm about to give you. But more importantly is sort of how it's transforming all the information that it finds from the cowords and creating the thematic map in the conceptual structure. I thought that was a really interesting one, so I included it in my results for this. And so this is what I got, right? So I was able to like set the different parameters for the thematic map. It takes my documents and looks at the author keywords in this example, right? I limited it to 200 words, did some clustering things, right? So you can play around with all of that to change up what you want to see, but you can see that there's different themes, niche themes, emerging themes, motor themes, different quadrants where in this case, the author keywords are sort of resonating. And again, there is one that you can slice over time, but I wanted to show you the other pretty cool one about the thematic evolution, where this is actually broken up all the way left 2011 to 2014, 2015 to 2016, and then 2020 to 2021 on the right. So it brings you through, again, these are the keyword plus concepts through time and how they're being used in earlier years versus later years, and how they've kind of gone throughout. Again, you can also use factor analysis, which is in that other slide. It will break your, do some clustering of your information. In this case, I use the keywords plus, and it looks like there's two distinct groups, right? So you could delve down into each of these and kind of figure out the main themes of them, and then like say, okay, this group is theme 1, theme 2, which I didn't do. I just wanted to show you how they grouped up, just to show that this can be done and delved into deeper. Right, so intellectual structure shows the relationship between things like co-citation networks and histograms. For example, here I've got the authors, and then it clusters them into different groups depending on what the topic is, which is teased out in the other cluster analyses. Right, you can also do historical direct citation networks. So if you're really interested in seeing the root of where things are coming up within your field, you can implement this, and the table behind that gives you some really nice information about, okay, what article is it, where was it published, what local citations, how often, what are the global citations, etc. Right, so finally, the social structure, right, how authors or institutions are relating to one another can also be visualized. Like, we're not surprised that there's a huge group and then a small group, because remember, we only have like 3 journals in like the majority. So it's good they're collaborating among one another, but could we possibly expand that, right? And then what institutions are working together? This is, can be really informative all on its own. And then finally, the different countries that are collaborating with one another on various things, right? So I stole the references from this really interesting keynote thing that I found, that I'm willing to share all of my sources of information and links with you all. And I'm also willing to give you kind of an example of how you upload stuff to the BiblioShiny if we have time. Anyway, that's the gist of it.
Well, first off, let me say we still have about 13 minutes.
Oh,
so,
awesome. Okay, because
yeah, we're
I
doing
was
good
at
on
20
time.
minutes on my my timer, and I thought,
Yep.
oh goodness, we only have a half hour. All
No,
right,
yeah, we're
so
going till 11:20, but then
yeah,
just a quick comment that I thought of as soon as I
yeah,
started to see all of your data
visualization.
presented, and visualizations, is that
Yeah.
this would be a great way to develop a tenure file for like an academic position.
Yes.
Right. If you wanted to, of course, you can Google Scholar yourself, right, and make sure that's accurate. But this would be a much deeper analysis if you're at all interested in convincing your dean or whomever
Yeah.
to give you a promotion.
Yeah, that your scholarship is being looked at and used, and how it fits
Yeah.
into the bigger picture. Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
I hadn't actually thought of that.
Here's a comment, sorry, that just came in from
Yeah.
sorry, SN Alred, pardon me.
Oh, you want to see the BiblioShiny? Oh, sure. I would
Yeah, see
gladly
an
share
example.
that.
So yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Let me go back to sharing. And I already cranked it up a little bit because it takes a little bit to upload the data and whatnot, but I can show you. So from the Web of Science, my 2000, I actually collected them into a zip file, because the Web of Science only allows you to put out 500 at a time with all the cited references and all the data that you need. So I carefully saved each of them, and then the BiblioShiny for R works with R. So what you do is you would install the base R, and then you install RStudio. And there's lots of help about that, or you can email me. I think it's included. And I'm glad to, share. We can video conference and I can show you how to do it. But it's pretty easy to set up and get them linked together. And then you would simply, library the bibliometric stuff, and then you run your BiblioShiny. And when that happens, it opens up in the internet interface, your web browser, to this welcome screen, and it kind of gives you about, now you can see where I stole my scientific mapping graphic from, right? And then more importantly, it brings you right here to this data file up here. So I'm going to just go to the import load data portion, and it gives you a couple of options. Actually, this is a more up-to-date BiblioShiny than I did my original analysis on my other computer, so it's pretty cool. You can save bibliometric files in R or Excel out of this once you've brought it in. But from the Web of Science, if you're specifically using Web of Science data, you have to use TXT in order for the BiblioShiny to consume it. So you can use raw data files, and then you can see that I uploaded my zip file of text files, and then you hit the start button and it does its processing thing, and then it spits out the data. So this is a screenshot I showed you earlier of the information. Then you can go to your filter, right? So for instance, I used all 10 years. That's what I wanted to take a look at. But you could narrow it down to only articles. You could look at just book chapters. So you can filter your data here for your whatever analysis that you want to perform. You can then go into your data set format, and it'll bring you through the main information, right? So here are the years, the different summation things I call the exploratory data. You can look at the annual scientific production. Like, I left this out, but it's pretty cool. Again, exploratory information about your query. You can look at average citations per year. Again, a major drop down here, I think because of COVID. And then the 3 fields plot, which again is interactive, and then you have opportunity to change all kinds of things and parameters over here. Same for the sources, right? The Bradford's law, cycle sources, authors, etc. If it brings you through all kinds of really interesting and quantitative measures of the information that you pulled. Then a new one that I haven't seen is this clustering coupling thing. So that was pretty cool. And then just to give you an idea, like thematic evolution, right? You can look at the different time slices. Then it starts to get into information about how you're gonna do different things in terms of the metrics that you're gonna use, et cetera, et cetera. And I would suggest, and I don't know if I do have it open, I stole most of my information in terms of the measurements behind a lot of these things from this bibliometrics example, right? So I just sort of used it as a guide to build my own, and then I'm trying to get to the actual numbers, right? So, and then I displayed my own data, but it had some really great background knowledge about the keywords, and then how the different conceptual mapping things worked in terms of the actual metrics. So again, like that's why I tried to break it down for here, so you could kind of see. So if you're not sure about how to do these things, you can easily get a good explanation of what they are in order to be able to sort of interpolate the graphic that it's producing, so that you can describe it within your work, which is what super advantageous too. So is there anything specific that you want to be able to see? Or was that good in terms of a lot?
You see that question? No.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I think that probably the reason why the politics portion didn't get teased out as well is because I used all the documents, and I should have probably narrowed it down more to the core. So or maybe changed my query, like done the query in parts. Like if I were to make it better to be able to sort of incorporate more of the policy, et cetera, in there, because yeah, I do see the STEM stuff, but that that I think is a function of my query.
Yeah, if you had looked in various social sciences, security studies,
exactly.
you could have gotten all kinds of different keywords, terms like military astronautics,
Exactly.
space power.
So, right. So originally in the Web of Science, let's see, I have that. When I had a lot come back in terms of the number of what I queried, here it is. Sorry, I'm like floundering around for it. Right. So of the million or even the 8,000, I could have maybe pulled from those rather than narrowing it so narrow down to the 2,200 here. So yeah, definitely it's a function of the query.
Very good. I don't see anything in the chat box.
Yeah.
We still have a few minutes, so
Okay.
I don't have a
I'll stop
specific
sharing.
question. Oh, as you like, but I don't have a specific question. Just as I see this, I come up with more ways that it's so useful.
Yeah.
And for example, if you're part of a funding agency, if anyone here is and the attendees is in one, you could see where the hot topics are of research is in your area. Again, the tenure file, or for example, if you're developing a seminar course or want to do a public presentation, what's hot in the literature right now. It's a very powerful tool. Thank you. That's very cool.
I'm glad to share it.
We'll give it another second here for any questions from the attendees or comments, suggestions. I don't know, Bert, do you have anything else to add in?
Yeah, I mean, this is very common in a lot of the library and information science research using tools like this. And again, since this is a topic that's so interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary, the results you're going to get will depend on, how you structure your searches, what time periods you may try to limit them by.
Yep, exactly. I wondered about that dip in your data in 2020, and I thought, okay, well, that's just COVID. I think
Yeah.
really reducing research availability, but
Yeah, that's
there's
why
probably
it would
other
be
factors too.
well, no, I mean, I think so too, and because it was such on an upward swing there,
Yeah.
that I mean, just looking at comparing other scholarship would probably produce the same results as what I'm guessing, but
Very
still,
possibly. Certainly,
yeah.
yeah, in STEM fields, you often need to travel somewhere or to visit a research lab, and well,
Exactly.
that didn't happen for
Right. Nobody can go anywhere. Yeah.
And in the humanities and social sciences, you may have to visit archives or libraries that repositories that don't have digital versions
Exactly.
of information you're interested in. And that's obviously been adversely affected by the pandemic.
Excellent point. Very good. Well, we're officially 2 minutes early, but if there's no further questions from the attendees, any further comments from our speakers?
Yeah, thank you for everybody that participated and asked us questions.
Yeah,
Very
thank
good
you.
session.
Yeah.
So yes, Bert, Emily, thank you so much. It was a great time. And
thank you,
I
Shawn.
think we all learned
Yeah,
quite
thanks,
a bit.
Shawn.
Tiffany.
Thank you.
Yeah, interesting stuff.
All right. And yes, take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye.